Um, so as Tamara was just saying, IJV was founded in 2008, and we are a grassroots anti-Zionist Canadian Jewish organization. We oppose all forms of racism and advocate for justice and peace for all in Palestine and Israel. And tonight I'm going to talk about IJV Canada as a national organization, about what our Waterloo Region chapter has done since it started, and a little bit about Judaism and Jewishness in general. And I should say that when IJV uses the term Palestine-Israel, this does not mean that we support a two-state solution. IJV does not advocate for any particular political solution apart from the end of Jewish supremacy, because we think the people who live between the river and the sea should determine their own future. But we're actually having an internal discussion right now about the best terminology to use for that land. And I think this debate demonstrates what differentiates IJV from other pro-Palestine organizations. We are a Jewish group. One of our primary goals is recruiting other Jews. So a question we're always going to face is, how do we remain true to our principles and Palestinian liberation while remaining accessible to Jews who may just be beginning their anti-Zionist journey? IJV formed in 2008. As today, it has approximately 2,000 members and actually 25 chapters across the country, I just learned. And that may sound small, but we should keep in mind that there are only around 400,000 Jews in all of Canada, about 1% of the population. This is a photo of IJV members demonstrating outside the Confederation building in Ottawa back in December, while a couple of hundred other members occupied the building to call for a two-way arms embargo. So according to IJV co-founder Diana Ralph, before 2008, there were various small pro-Palestine Jewish groups across the country, but they tended to fight with each other, and there was no national unified voice that could counter the Zionist narratives being promoted by right-wing pro-Israel organizations like CIJA, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, or B'nai B'rith, or the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center. And these three groups consistently claim to represent the Jewish community, but they don't. Partly because Jews are not a monolith. We're a diverse group when it comes to politics, religious belief, class, and even race. And also because these organizations are not elected by or accountable to Canadian Jews in any way. They're nonprofits with a Zionist agenda. And IJV nationally and locally spends a lot of time trying to get the media and politicians and the general public to understand and acknowledge this. And again, back in 2008, the United Church of Canada and labor unions and some other groups wanted to do more to support Palestine, but they knew organizations like CIJA would accuse them of being anti-Semitic, and getting public approval from a Jewish organization would give them some protection against that. So that's why the co-founders of IJV realized they needed to form a national Jewish organization. And they decided to model its structure after Jewish Voice for Peace, which is the largest American anti-Zionist Jewish organization. So today, IJV has 3 paid staff members, but everyone else is a volunteer. There's a national steering committee that sets policy, and chapters across the country, and the chapters have a lot of autonomy to deal with whatever issues are specific to their communities. So CIJA and other Zionists love to claim that IJV members are not real Jews. And according to them, we're literally just pretending to be Jewish to promote Hamas's agenda. But that's me on the right. I did not endure Hebrew school for 10 years to have some racists tell me I'm not a real Jew. And from the beginning, IJV did actually have non-Jewish allies asking whether they could join. And what they decided is that Jews can join as members and non-Jews can be supporters. So only members can vote on issues affecting chapters in the national organization, only members can be on the steering committee, and our current staff members are Jewish. And when non-Jews ask me how they can help support Palestine, I direct them to N4P, because it is really important for IJV to maintain that credibility as a Jewish organization. So since I joined IJV in 2021, I've seen it focus on certain key issues. One of them is BDS, which IJV endorsed in 2009. IJV also offers anti-Zionist, anti-Semitism workshops. And another extremely important campaign is resisting the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. IHRA stands for International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And I assume probably everyone here is familiar with that, but the IRA definition of anti-Semitism is extremely problematic because its real goal is suppressing criticism of Israel, not protecting Jews. And it really doesn't acknowledge that most anti-Jewish hatred and violence comes from the political right. So IJV has a national committee dedicated to opposing the IRA definition. And when I became more active in IJV in the fall of 2022, it was specifically because two Waterloo Region District School Board trustees tried to get the board to adopt the IRA definition. I'm a WRDSB parent, and IJV asked if I would delegate to the school board about this issue, which I did. But fortunately, there had already been so much Palestinian-led local opposition to this motion that the trustees withdrew it before it could be voted on. And IJV members continue to fight every effort to adopt the definition, nationally and locally. The No IRA Committee actually just published Silenced in Our Name, which is a response to the IRA handbook the Canadian government recently published. IJV's publication points out all the ways in which the definition can be abused, and IJV's previously published reports on how the IRA definition has helped censor pro-Palestine voices, even where it has not been formally adopted. IJV is actually hosting a webinar on June 21st for the general public about the dangers of the IRA definition with a panel of experts, so I would encourage everyone to sign up for that. IJV also specifically focuses on raising awareness of what the Jewish National Fund does. So a lot of Canadians, including many Jews, think the JNF just plants trees in Israel, but its real mission is the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. And IJV got involved in a years-long campaign led by a Palestinian-Canadian doctor to get the CRA to revoke the JNF's charitable status, which would stop its donors from getting tax breaks. And in 2024, they succeeded. So now IJV is continuing to pressure the CRA to revoke the charitable status of other nonprofits that are actually contributing to the murder and displacement of Palestinians. IJV also spends a lot of time pressuring the federal government. And most recently, I think as Jessica mentioned, it collaborated with Neighbors for Palestine, Palestinian Youth Movement, and other organizations on the Vote Palestine initiative. And 3 IJV members actually ran for the NDP in the last federal election. And of course, they all signed the Vote Palestine pledge. And both nationally and on the chapter level, IJV has been involved in opposing bubble zone bylaws, one of which was unfortunately just passed in Toronto. So bubble zone bylaws prevent people from protesting within a certain radius of places of worship, schools, and daycares. And they're being promoted specifically to limit pro-Palestine protests, although, of course, they could limit other kinds of leftist protests. And so these bubble zone bylaws were inspired by protests outside synagogues, not during services, but during sales of real estate in illegal Israeli settlements. So even though IJV co-organized those protests, Zionists have been portraying them as anti-Semitic. And once again, IJV is trying to use its status as a Jewish organization to say bubble zones are not going to protect Jews. They just violate our charter rights and promote anti-Palestinian racism. And I think we should really watch out for attempts to pass bylaws like this in Waterloo Region. And I just heard today that the federal government might try to incorporate something like this into the criminal code, which would be really terrible, and we should definitely resist it. So speaking of Waterloo Region, our chapter was founded right after October 7th, 2023, when several of us were so horrified by Israel's attacks on Gaza that we simultaneously emailed the national staff asking to start our own chapter. Right away, our members connected with N4P, PYM, and Sporus Scattered, and we started attending the protests that PYM was organizing, as well as rallies at UW and rallies at our MP's offices demanding an arms embargo. And as Jessica mentioned, in spring 2024, Tim Lewis, the Liberal MP for Kitchener-Conestoga, signed the Arms Embargo Now petition. And right before that, 2 of our members, one of whom was Tim's constituent, met with him. So obviously, this was due to the months of pressure from N4P, Palestinian activists, local faith leaders, and other allies. But we'd like to think we helped. Throughout the fall of 2023, we reached out to local media to try to get them to acknowledge anti-Zionist Jews in their reporting. CTV Kitchener did a story about this rally in the photo from December 2023 and included a photo of our banner. One of our members spoke to CBC KW about Hanukkah that year and got to talk about her opposition to the attacks on Gaza. And since then, we've managed to get quoted here and there. We also call out local media on our Instagram and Facebook when they display a Zionist bias. And of course, that happens all the time. You've probably noticed that the Waterloo Region Record is hot garbage. And CBC-KW, unfortunately, did a terrible story about security concerns at the University of Waterloo that lumped together the hate-motivated stabbing that happened in 2023 with last year's pro-Palestine student encampment. And they fixed that after we complained. So, sorry. I think I got a little mixed up here. Oh, there we go. Sorry. We knew the encampment wasn't a security concern because a few IJV members actively participated in it, and we hosted Shabbat there most Friday nights. A lot of IJV members nationwide are university professors or students. The ones who are faculty are often also members of the Jewish Faculty Network, and they use their university connections to create educational initiatives. So, for example, IJV's Carleton University chapter created an exhibit called Silenced by Scholasticide about the scholasticide in Gaza, which is now traveling to other Canadian universities. In March 2025, a UW professor in our chapter put together a panel discussion with Tal Mitnick and Einat Gerlitz, two young Israelis who refused to serve in the IDF and spent several months in prison as a result. They're part of an Israeli organization, Mesarvot, that encourages Israeli high school students to refuse to serve and then supports them when they are imprisoned. IJV Canada actually helped organize a speaking tour for Tal and Einat, so they were able to talk about their experiences across the country. More than 2,300 people attended their events, and their audiences in larger cities included Jews who were new to IJV. So just as IJV Canada has to counter Sija's and B'nai B'rith's claims to represent the Jewish community, IJV Waterloo Region has to spend a lot of time informing the public, the media, politicians, and community institutions like our libraries that certain Zionist groups do not speak for all local Jews. Chabad, which is very active at UW and puts up a Hanukkah menorah in Uptown every year, is a right-wing Hasidic sect. Local media loves to quote their rabbi, but this is kind of like getting a Baptist minister or an evangelical pastor to speak for all Christians in Waterloo Region. Hillel Waterloo and Laurier portrays itself as a resource for all Jewish university students, but this is false. Hillel is a Zionist organization that forbids its chapters from working with anti-Zionist speakers or groups. And that's why for many years, Jewish students in the US and Canada have been trying to create alternatives to Hillel or get their universities to drop Hillel. This is a graphic from the Drop Hillel website. The Waterloo Region Jewish Community Council is a group led by members of Chabad and the two local synagogues. When we tried to advertise our chapter events in their Facebook group, we discovered that they don't consider anti-Zionist Jews part of the community. So when we founded IJV Waterloo Region, I assumed that we would just be a political organization. But one member asked if we could have Shabbat dinner together, and then we started doing that almost every week. We started getting together for other holidays, and in 2024 and 2025, we hosted anti-Zionist Passover Seders with IJV's Guelph chapter that were open to Jews and allies, and these Seders have come to mean a lot to us. Some of us have families who totally support our anti-Zionist activism, but other members have become estranged from their families and friends because of it, and others feel they have to hide their activism to maintain relationships with their families or to keep their jobs. So sharing Jewish rituals has become one of our primary chapter activities, and I know that's true for many other IJV chapters as well. Although there are some progressive synagogues in Canada and the US that welcome anti-Zionists, and there are even anti-Zionist synagogues, there are just not enough Jews in Waterloo Region for that to be possible here. We only make up around 0.3% of Waterloo Region's population, or approximately 2,000 people. And I think there's a shift happening across the country as Canadian Jews get fed up with their synagogue Zionism and are finding ways to practice their religion outside the usual institutions. Other Canadian Jews might be becoming more secular, or maybe we're always secular, because some people think of their Jewishness more as an ethnic or cultural identity than as a religion. And big problem is that these so-called unaffiliated Jews are not counted in surveys of Canadian Jews. So I said earlier that Canadian Zionists like to claim that IJV members aren't real Jews. They also often claim that all anti-Zionist Jews are secular, which is untrue. There's a large, vibrant group called Rabbis for Ceasefire. But they say this because some religious Jews believe that secular Jews are not real Jews. People who convert to Judaism, unfortunately, also face this kind of gatekeeping. So this is why IJV really wants the public to understand that Jews are not a monolith. Different movements within Judaism have very different beliefs. Although most Jews in Canada are from Eastern Europe, many of them are not. And although Zionism is inseparable from white supremacy, not all Israeli Jews are white. The Israeli Black Panthers formed because Black Jews and Jews of color have always faced discrimination and police brutality within Israel. And they still do, even though now the IDF loves to put Black soldiers in its propaganda videos. So Israel is simultaneously racially diverse and a white supremacist settler colonial state, just like Canada. Okay, and I think it's important to ask, if Jews make up only 1% of Canada's population, and there aren't too many Jewish MPs, why is our government so Zionist? And just a couple of disclaimers. In this part of my presentation, I'm offering opinions based on my own experience and research. I'm not speaking for IJV as an organization, and I'm not sharing facts. This is just my interpretation of what I've observed. And although I'm going to talk about some other factors contributing to Canadian Zionism, that obviously doesn't absolve Canadian Jews of responsibility to resist Zionism and make amends for it. So Canada is not Zionist because Jews control the media or the banks. We do not, nor do we have Jewish space lasers. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's a conspiracy theory started by an American congresswoman. I think Canada's Zionism can largely be attributed to racism. Jews are considered white now and Palestinians are not. We can blame decades and decades of specifically anti-Palestinian racism, which is evident in how the mainstream media has dehumanized Palestinians throughout the genocide. And we can blame Canada's rampant Islamophobia, even though, of course, not all Palestinians are Muslim. But I also really want to highlight Christian Zionism. I mentioned that back in 2022, two WRDSB trustees wanted the board to adopt the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. Those trustees who are still on the board are not Jewish, they're Christian Zionists. And after their motion failed, they went back to tweeting anti-Semitic dog whistles about globalists and cultural Marxism. So Christian Zionists do not support Jews, they support Israel because they believe if all Jews move there, will help bring about Jesus's return. And in this scenario, Jews get to choose whether they will convert to Christianity or die horribly and spend eternity in hell. And these people are part of the conservative base. Stephen Harper is a Christian Zionist, so that's why he and politicians like Pierre Poilievre love Israel. But it's obvious that they don't care about Jews who live in Canada. And there have been anti-Zionist Jews for as long as Zionism has existed, because some of us were always able to grasp that we shouldn't have to move to another country to be safe, that colonizing Palestine and displacing the people who live there was wrong, and that Zionism has always served the interests of politicians who hate Jews and want us to move far away. And then why have the liberals also been so disappointing on the genocide in Gaza? Israel is a top customer for Canadian military goods. The volume of Canadian military goods being sold to Israel has skyrocketed over the past several years. And when it comes to Canadian components that are going into American weapons destined for Israel, like such as F-35s, we have no idea what the volume of that is and how much money is changing hands. So you may already know there's going to be a rally at Centra Industries, which is involved in F-35 manufacturing on June 20th, and I would encourage everyone to go. I think it's also important to ask, why are so many diaspora Jews still Zionists? And here again, I'm not speaking for IJV, I'm speculating based on my own experience, but I think it comes down to brainwashing and trauma. I'm originally from New York, where I grew up attending synagogue every week and going to Hebrew school for a few hours every week. And we spent a lot of time talking about Israel, but only in the time of the Bible, not the 20th century. No one ever said the word Palestinian. And I had no idea until I was an adult that anyone was murdered or displaced when Israel became a state. I'm always going to be ashamed of that, but I attended mostly white schools where I had no Palestinian classmates and the subject never came up. And I didn't have access to the internet until university. I've also never visited Palestine, Israel, and I felt no connection to it, so I didn't make any effort to learn more about it. My parents' whole social life revolved around our synagogue, so I never met anyone who told me they had a different perspective until university when I had an anti-Zionist Jewish classmate. And I think my experience was typical. Simone Zimmerman, a Jewish American activist who's one of the subjects of the documentary Israelism, describes a very similar upbringing. And in the film, she says she didn't start questioning Zionism until she was a student at Berkeley, when Hillel encouraged her to delegate against a BDS motion. And she recalls how she literally didn't know why the Palestinian students delegating kept talking about ethnic cleansing. I think this shows how little information most diaspora Jews have about Palestinian history, and the mainstream media does such a poor job of covering Palestine that if you don't really want to know more, it's easy to remain ignorant. So that's the brainwashing. And as for the trauma, my father was a Holocaust refugee, and he and my mother both had relatives murdered by the Nazis. So they viewed Israel as a safety net where they could go if things got really bad for Jews in the US. And after fleeing his homeland, my father did experience more anti-Semitism as a young man in the United States, but things completely changed for Jews over the decades that followed, and he could never recognize that. He never reckoned with the fact that his children hardly ever experienced anti-Semitism, and that for most of his life, he was a middle-class white man. Jews from the former Soviet Union have much more recent experiences of systemic and violent anti-Jewish hatred. My Hebrew school spent a lot of time discussing the Holocaust, and we learned about it in the most traumatizing way possible. We were assured that our neighbors could turn on us at any moment, and it could happen again. But it's okay, because this time we have Israel. And I recently read Naomi Klein's book, Doppelganger, and she writes about having the exact same experience as a Jewish kid growing up in Montreal. So trauma absolutely does not excuse Zionism, but I think it helps explain it. Jewish anti-Zionism is multi-generational. There are Holocaust survivors and Soviet refugees and plenty of boomers who support Palestinians. And there are young Jews who are total fascists. But polls in the US and Canada show more support for Palestine among young people. And I think it's because they have more access to other perspectives directly and online, and they don't feel threatened as Jews in the same way that their parents and grandparents might. I want to end on a hopeful note. I'm seeing more and more Jews speaking up and saying that genocide is not a Jewish value. And all of the anti-Zionist Jews I've spoken to agree that once you know what has happened and is still happening in Palestine, Israel, you can't unknow it and you feel compelled to do something. So Zionism hasn't always been entrenched in diaspora Jews' lives. It took decades for that to happen. And the Reform movement used to be anti-Zionist. So I'm confident that we can reclaim a Judaism beyond Zionism, and I hope that IJV will be part of that. And in this last slide, on the left, that's another photo of IJV and Jews Say No to Genocide protesting in Ottawa. And on the right, this is an image of Jewish Currents, which is a fantastic magazine, I guess, about progressive Jews and anti-Zionism that I would encourage everyone to check out. So thank you very much.